Good day, everyone. You're welcome to my YouTube channel, Everything Medical. In today's video, we shall be appreciating the Circle of Willis, which can be called the Circle of John Willis, or the circulus arteriosus that supplies to the brain. It is that architectural vasculature that gives strong perfusion to the structures of the brain or the neural structures. This is an important topic in neuroanatomy, right? If you're coming across my channel in your first time, please subscribe, like, comment, and also share our video so that it will get your wider reach. Now let's delve into the video. Now, this is the structure that we shall be using to appreciate the Circle of Willis. Right? So the first thing is introduction. What is Circle of Willis? The Circle of Willis is that vascular architectural network or the vascular anastomosis that gives strong perfusion to the structures of the brain. It is that anastomosis in the brain that supplies to the neural structures, right? It is a vascular anastomosis or vascular architectural anastomosis, which gives strong perfusion or strong vascular supply to the structures of the brain, right? Without the Circle of Willis or the participating artery that form the Circle of Willis, there will be an vascular diseases of the brain, right? And understand that the Circle of Willis is so much important to understand because there are so many cardiovascular diseases, right? Or cerebrovascular disease per se, which give strong perfusion to the neural structures. And these vascular diseases include embolism, thrombolism, and also hemorrhage. So when you understand how Circle of Willis goes and how it works in the brain and all that, you'll be able to know how embolism occurs, like how cerebral embolism occurs, or thrombolism or hemorrhage. And that is what usually lead to stroke. That is ischemic stroke or hemorrhagic stroke. These are vascular conditions that are related to the Circle of Willis, right? Now, brain is a compassionate organ. It is a delicate organ in the body. Brain does not store glucose. Brain consumes 20% of glucose in the body, right? It also gains 20% of the cardiac output, right? So brain usually gains glucose continuously from the body. It doesn't store glucose. It gains it directly from the body, right? So to tell you that blood supply or vascular supply to the brain is so much important because oxygen has to be supplied to the brain tissue for effective function, right? So that is how it works. Now, the next thing is the arterial main stem that participates in formation of the circulus arteriosus or the Circle of Willis, right? What are those arterial main stem that participate in formation of the blood vessels that forms the Circle of Willis? Number one is that there are 4 major arterial stems that form Circle of Willis: 2 vertebral arteries and 2 internal carotid arteries. 1, 2 vertebral arteries and also 2 internal carotid artery, right? So these are the main arterial stem that forms the branches which participate in formation of the circulus arteriosus or the Circle of Willis, right? So we shall be discussing the cause of the vertebral artery before we dive into the cause of the internal carotid artery, because that's so much important so that you know where it blends or transverses or pierces or passes through to communicate to the brain, right? Now, first is the vertebral artery. vertebral artery. There are two vertebral arteries, right? The right and left vertebral artery. Now watch. This is the undersurface of the brain, that is the base of the brain, right? The inferior part of the brain, right? Which rests on the base of the skull. Now, there are two vertebral arteries, right and left vertebral arteries, which arises from the subclavian artery. And the subclavian artery made its origin from the convexity of the aorta or the aortic arch, right? Now what? This is left vertebral artery, left vertebral artery. Why here? This is left vertebral artery, please. Left vertebral artery. And here is right vertebral artery. The right and left vertebral artery arises from the right and left subclavian artery. And the right subclavian artery arises from the brachiocephalic trunk, right? While the left subclavian artery arises directly from the convexity of the aorta. That is the important thing to note about, because the right and left subclavian artery does not make the same origin from the brachiocephalic, from the arch of the aorta, right? It is only the left subclavian artery that arises from the arch of the aorta, while the right subclavian artery arises from the brachiocephalic trunk, which make it a direct origin from the arch of the aorta, right? Now, once the left and right vertebral artery arises from the right and left subclavian artery, it courses upward by passing through the intervertebral foramen. It passes through the what? Intervertebral foramen. It ascends upward to pass through the intervertebral foramen. Now, once it passes through the intervertebral foramen, when it gets to the foramen magnum, because it enters the brain by passing through the foramen magnum. The right and left vertebral artery enters the brain by passing through the foramen magnum. Now, at the level of the lower border of the pons, it unites together to form the basilar artery. You can see it here. These two blood vessels called the right and left vertebral artery, as they arises from the subclavian artery, it courses upward by passing through the what? Intervertebral foramen. It enters the brain by passing through the foramen magnum. Now, at the level of the lower border of the pons, it unites. Two of them unite. This is the level of the lower border of the pons, because here, this structure is the brainstem, right? This is the brainstem. And here is showing the spinal cord. You can see the gray matter of the spinal cord, right? So, it ascends upward. At the level of the lower border of the pons, it unites. The two branches unite. It unites to form the basilar artery. So, this is the basilar artery per se. This is the basilar artery. The basilar artery. The basilar artery then ascends up on the midline, particularly on the anterior surface of the pons, towards its upper border, where it terminates by dividing into two terminal branches, the posterior cerebral artery. That is the right and left posterior cerebral artery per se. Now you can see here, this is the right and left cerebral artery, because the basilar artery terminates by dividing into two terminal branches, the right and left posterior cerebral artery. So here is the right posterior cerebral artery, right posterior cerebral artery. While this is the left posterior cerebral artery. So this is the end terminal point of the basilar artery, because the sole aim of the basilar artery is to form the right and left posterior cerebral artery. Recall that as the basilar artery is ascending upward at the anterior surface of the pons, particularly on the midline, it also gives small branches. We call it the pointing branches, which supplies to the pons. All these small branches are called the pointing branches, which applies to the pons, right? We call it the pointing branches. The pointing branches, which applies to the pons. This is also another branch, which is called the superior cerebellar artery. The superior cerebellar artery. Now, as the vertebral artery is coursing upward to enter the brain by passing through the foramen magnum, it gives off branches, right? This artery here is called the meningeal artery. The meningeal artery. Why this is called the medullary branches. The medullary branches. This branch here is called the anterior spinal artery. These are the branches that the vertebral artery gives off. Anterior spinal artery. Anterior spinal artery is a direct branch from the vertebral artery, right? We have another branch, which is called the posterior spinal artery. Is actually a branch from the superior posterior spinal artery. Now, this branch is called the posterior inferior cerebral artery. Posterior inferior cerebral artery. This here is called the anterior inferior cerebral artery. Recall that the posterior spinal artery is actually a branch of the posterior inferior cerebral artery, which is a direct branch from the vertebral artery, right? Now, we also have the labyrinthine artery. The labyrinthine artery, which is a branch of the basilar artery. So these are the branches from the vertebral artery and also the basilar artery, right? Now, how does the internal carotid artery goes? So we have number 2, the internal carotid artery. This vessel is actually a branch which arises from the common carotid artery, right? And the common carotid artery arises from the aortic arch and the right and also the brachiocephalic trunk, right? The left common carotid artery arises directly from the aortic arch, while the right arises from the brachiocephalic trunk. It is similar to the right subclavian artery, which arises from the brachiocephalic trunk, right? So this blood vessel arises from the common carotid artery. It then enters the cranial cavity by passing through the carotid canal and the superior part of the foramen lacerum. The carotid canal, and foramen lacerum. It passes through the superior part of the what? Foramen lacerum. At that place, it then takes a sinus course through the cavernous sinuses, where it ends immediately, which is now lateral to the what? Optic chiasma in that region. It is lateral to the what? Optic chiasma in that region, where it then, which is now anterior to the substances or the perforating substances, dividing into 2 branches: the larger cerebral artery and the smaller anterior cerebral artery. The larger cerebral artery and the small anterior cerebral artery. So these are the 2 branches that the internal carotid artery gives off as it enters the cranial cavity by passing through the carotid canal and the superior part of the foramen lacerum. Remember that it takes a sinus course through the cavernous sinuses, where it ends immediately, right? Thereby giving 2 branches: the larger middle cerebral artery and the small anterior cerebral artery, or the smaller anterior cerebral artery. Now what? These 2 blood vessels here is the left and right internal carotid artery. Internal carotid artery. It gives 2 branches as it terminates. The first is the middle cerebral artery. Look at it here. The middle cerebral artery. The next branch, and that is the smaller one, is the anterior cerebral artery. This is the anterior cerebral artery. Anterior cerebral artery. Recall that the left posterior cerebral artery give branch to the posterior communicating artery. This is the posterior communicating artery. Posterior communicating artery. The right and left anterior cerebral artery give rise to the anterior communicating artery. Anterior communicating artery. Right? Now, There are so many branches that arises from the middle cerebral artery and the anterior cerebral artery. First of all, the anterior cerebral artery give off branches which include the recurrent artery of hernia. Look at it here. Recurrent artery of hernia. Recurrent artery of hernia, right? It also give branch to the medial straight artery. Medial straight artery. Why the middle cerebral artery give rise to some of branches where we have the lateral straight artery, the lateral straight artery. It also gives rise to the anterior carotid artery. Anterior carotid artery. Why the posterior cerebral artery give rise to the posterior carotid artery. Carotid artery. So these are the branches that the anterior cerebral artery and the middle cerebral artery gives off as they form the circulus arteriosus. Now, the next thing we shall be looking on to is the formation of the circulus arteriosus. How does it form? Right? The formation. The next outline is the formation. The circulus arteriosus is being formed by the branches of the basilar artery and the internal carotid artery. The branches of the basilar artery and the internal carotid artery, two of them unite at the base of the brain, particularly at the interpeduncular fossa. They unite at the base of the brain, particularly the interpeduncular fossa, where they form six-sided polygon of artery called the circulus arteriosus or the Circle of Willis, right? Interpeduncular fossa. Interpeduncular fossa. This is where the circulus arteriosus or Circle of Willis is located at the place of the brain, right? Now, the circulus arteriosus is found at the interpeduncular subarachnoid system, which is at the base of the brain. They are together, right? So this is where it's located, the interpeduncular fossa of the base of the brain. That is where it's found. So here is the Circle of the Willis. The Circle of Willis. The Circle of Willis. Recall that there are two branch of arteries that form Circle of Willis properly, right? We have the branches from the basilar artery and the branches from the internal carotid artery. Those are the arteries that forms the participative formation of the Circle of Willis or the circulus arteriosus. The next outline are likely to be the importance or the significance of circulus arteriosus. Importance. The main the main importance of circulus arteriosus is that it provides collateral supply to the brain structure, because this blood vessel anastomosis actually contribute so much importantly to the blood supply to the brain, right? So it provides collateral supply to the neural structures. Imagine if there is a blockage to a particular blood vessel in the brain, there will be a collateral supply, or it will provide another route of blood supply to the structure. That is the major significance of the circulus arteriosus, or the Circle of Willis. It provides collateral supply to the neural structures. Now, the next is the branches or the boundaries per se. Boundaries. It is being formed or bounded anteriorly, majorly by the anterior cerebral artery. It is bounded anteriorly here by the anterior cerebral arteries. That is the branches of the anterior cerebral arteries. You can see it here. The branches of the anterior cerebral arteries. Posteriorly, it is being formed by the branches of the basilar arteries. You can see the basilar artery here, the branches of the basilar arteries on this region. Now, laterally, it is being formed by the posterior communicating artery. It is being formed by the what? Posterior communicating artery alongside with the posterior cerebral artery. You can see it here. Laterally on the both sides, it is being formed by the posterior communicating artery, which unites the middle cerebral artery with the right and left posterior cerebral artery. So those are the boundaries of the Circle of Willis. Anteriorly by the branches of the anterior cerebral artery, posteriorly by the branches of the basilar artery. Then on lateral aspect, both sides is the posterior communicating artery, which unites the middle cerebral artery and the right and left posterior cerebral artery. So that is the boundaries of the circulus arteriosus, or the Circle of Willis. The next outline is the clinical correlation. Clinical correlation. Number one is congenital cerebral aneurysm. Congenital cerebral aneurysm. Congenital cerebral aneurysm. It is a condition whereby there is an abnormal dilation of the blood vessel wall, right, in the brain. Now, it is mainly occurring in the point of anastomosis between the basilar artery and the internal carotid artery, which is this point that forms the Circle of Willis. This is where it usually occurs, congenital cerebral aneurysm. Now, how does it form? There is what we call tunica media. It is an elastic tissue that is found in the blood vessel wall. When this tunica media is not present during development in the blood vessel of the brain, which participates in formation of the circulus arteriosus here, when it's not present in the blood vessel wall, thereby it will make the blood vessel of the Circle of Willis not to be firm in accommodating blood pressure. Thereby, it will loosen its strength, becoming abnormally dilated. So we call it congenital cerebral aneurysm, whereby there is an abnormal dilation of the blood vessel that participates in formation of the circulus arteriosus due to absence of the tunica media. tunica media is an elastic tissue that is found in the blood vessel wall. When it's not present, it will loosen its strength, thereby being vulnerable to aneurysm. And when it is being annullated, it presents a berry appearance. It presents a berry appearance. That is why it is termed berry aneurysm. So you can call congenital cerebral aneurysm berry aneurysm. So it can be called berry aneurysm. It can be called berry aneurysm due to its appearance when it occurs. The next one is subarachnoid hemorrhage, right? Subarachnoid what? Hemorrhage. It is a condition whereby the berry annulated blood vessel got ruptured. That is what we call subarachnoid hemorrhage, whereby that annulated blood vessel of the brain, which participates in formation of the circulus arteriosus, got ruptured. Thereby, it will spill blood in the brain, which might implicate a certain condition such as confusion and many other neurological conditions, which is not good, right? So these are the major clinical relations that are associated with the circulus arteriosus. I believe we have done justice to this topic, ranging from introduction to the clinical correlation. Thanks so much for staying to the end. I really appreciate it.